simply software developers at that point had split between backend and front end because of company needs. So at that point, since everything was split, the initial idea that was very sounding of HTML5 semantic web, where you basically generate server-side HTML, very simple, and then with your CSS do the styling, and you just add the tiny bit of JavaScript for the dynamic part. That no longer works when you have two separated population of developers. You have to make front end that makes just API calls to the back end, like if the two things don't talk, because they don't talk in the organization.
Hey, Luca here. Welcome to a new episode of the Refactoring Podcast, where every 2 weeks we interview a world-class tech leader. Today's guest is Salvatore Sanfilippo, also known as Antirez. Salvatore is the creator of Redis, an open source data store used by hundreds of thousands of developers across the world. And he's also a writer. He published the popular sci-fi novel called Warp, which anticipated a lot of what is happening today with AI. With Salvatore, we talked about open source, what makes a project successful, and how to make it successful for its maintainers. And then we discussed how Salvatore uses AI for some very complex coding, making him 5 times faster than before. And finally, I asked him about his writing work and what is the experience of writing a novel versus a software project. So let's dive right into it after a short word from our sponsor. Hey, before we continue, I want to spend 1 minute to tell you more about our podcast sponsor for this season, which is Sleuth. Because chances are you know of engineering metrics programs that did not get adopted or failed to deliver the promised productivity gains. But why? Because oftentimes these metrics live in dashboards, and dashboards die in loneliness. They were built for a purpose, but then people just forget about them. So Sleuth Pulse solves this problem by bringing metrics and people together, empowering engineering reviews. So you can easily use metrics in sprint reviews, monthly check-ins, or resource planning to get better alignment and better execution. This is truly the best way to make metrics a part of your workflow. And Sleuth improves these reviews by bringing in quantitative and qualitative data, letting people add context and using AI to summarize data and pick out outliers. So check out sleuth.io for more information. Hi, Salvatore. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Luca.
So, Salvatore, you are the creator of Redis, which is an in-memory data store, and it's one of the most popular NoSQL data stores in the world, which, I mean, it's kind of hard to define what Redis is because it does so many things. So was that a good definition for you?
I believe that the original way that was to say it's a data structure server, still it's the best definition of it, because the server part is because it's exposed to the network, so it makes sense to call it a server, and also because it handles the implementation, the storage of the data structures for you, but otherwise is that. And the fact that it is also a database and also a cache is because those two objects, after all, are created on top of data structures. So given that you have exposed data structures, you can create for yourself basically storage or caching or messaging, whatever.
Yeah, I love that because it keeps you open to possibilities, to more things to do in the future while keeping true to the definition still of data structured server. And you're also a writer because you published the popular sci-fi novel called Warp a few years ago. And you're Italian like me, so it's a double pleasure to have you on the show because it doesn't always happen for me to have Italian guests. So thank you again.
A big pleasure for me as well. Thanks.
So I want to say another thing because people who listen to this maybe don't know. In Italy, I feel you're kind of a legendary engineer, not just because you created some of the most important open source software in the world, used by a lot of people, but also because you did all of that mostly from your hometown in Sicily, which is not exactly Silicon Valley. Am I right?
Absolutely. But if we think at it, basically, even when things are done in Berlin, London, or Silicon Valley, at the end there is some engineer in some room
Yes.
in front of some keyboard. So basically, in some way, information technology is uh, is interesting compared to other industries because of that. I must say that this is changing because AI is the first things in our industry which changed this paradigm in some way because after all, without a lot of money for GPUs, it's not possible anymore to compete with certain environments, big companies and stuff.
Yeah, I agree. But so we always say that technology for software engineers is democratic, so you can have an impact from wherever you are. But then it's also true that many of us sometimes think that to have more opportunities, you have to move to like the big centers where the most innovation happens. And I'm sure that you have made a lot of incredibly popular software, and people will have tried to take you away from Sicily. So I was wondering, has the decision of staying there for you always come easily? So have you decided to prioritize lifestyle, family, and how was the process? Because I think it's very interesting.
I think that to be a successful software engineer, you can be everywhere, but to make a lot of money, it is much better to stay in the center of things. So basically, it's not much like okay, there are people that have this idea that to do great engineering, I have to stay in to be in Google or in Microsoft. I
Yeah,
don't think like that. So for me,
yeah,
it was not a problem of performance, but how many money you can make, because in Sicily, of course, this is much more limited. For example, in
yeah,
my case, I decided to be just a player of the Redis company ecosystem and not the founder of the company.
yeah,
This of course reduced my ability to accumulate wealth and money, but for me this was not a big priority because I earned enough money to be safe, to don't have to don't look at tags in the supermarket about the prices of
yes,
things and that's enough. I believe that I was very poor at some point in my life, like I struggled in order to pay for my house, and this is terrible because you cannot sleep at night, and this is bad. Then when you reach the point that you earn something like 4,000 euros per month, already all this is gone and you are okay, and then
yeah,
everything that comes after that contributes in a very small part to your well-being. you know
yeah,
there are people that are happy to have a Ferrari, maybe, or to have very fashionable clothes. But normally, people in IT are not like that. So are very unlikely to be very, very happy because on the other side, when I was traveling more often to the United States, I met with many people in their 20s that because they become rich too fast, they experience the lack of purpose. Mm,
mm,
and know what? And know what
yes,
stage of life. So I think it was very easy for me to decide to stay here because the center of my relationships was here. So I had no reasons to go away. Also, this thing that I'm saying now, it's now a bit more obvious because I believe basically the Europe to be more or less at the highest moment of civilization in the world. We have a compromise between capitalism, between socialism, between not
yeah,
letting people too behind. Now it's a bit more clear, but I always thought so later. For example, for me, it was unacceptable to be an US citizen because there is death penalty there. And I don't think that it's possible to create a sane democracy with weapons, that penalty, and now we are saying that there are more troubles than that. So for me, it was also a political decision to stay here. However, the smart listener to this podcast may detect that often the money that I earn comes from United States or from Israel and so forth. So yeah, it's easy to talk like that. In this regard, I understand that there is some dissonance in my reasoning, but still it is different to be under the social security of Europe or
Yeah.
expose yourself to another context which is a bit more far west.
Yeah, I totally agree with all the points you make, which I think are very wise and all valid. I mean, if I think of my own journey, I've been a VC-backed startup founder, so like mad ambition for almost like 10 years. And then I quit, and now I'm like a full-time newsletter writer. And my mindset shifted completely, and now I have a lifestyle that I really enjoy with my family, with my wife, and I'm incredibly protective of that. And I realize how much, as you said, and more money brings diminishing returns and only a small slice of happiness and how things you enjoy in life versus being close to your family, spending time the way you like. So I really appreciate that, but I have to say that it took quite some time for my mindset to frame around this, because when I was younger, I don't think it was obvious this to me at all.
Yeah, because I believe the main narrative is completely opposite. So you are continuously advertised to do exactly the contrary of that.
Yes, especially software engineers, 1 billion companies, and so on and so forth. I agree. So I wanted to talk about open source because, of course, you have created some incredibly popular open source software. And we often hear that open source has won because like 99% of software that runs on servers is open source. But many times maintainers, even of popular software, struggle to make a living. So the open source business model is still unclear in some cases. So first of all, I wanted to ask you, what does an open source project need in 2025 to be successful for you? What are the ingredients?
I don't think that this changed much compared to the past, but now there are a few things that make simplicity more interesting than before. Because in the past, the problem was if it works well or if it doesn't work very well. And there was, of course, also free complexity without that was not proportional to the problem to solve. But now,
Yeah.
this problem is so widespread that, for example, something like UV, the new package manager for Python, is very easily penetrating a crowded environment just because it's simpler, more lean, more fast, and so forth. So there is a need for simplicity in general everywhere. So one very easy thing to do is to make things very accessible. Like you bump in the GitHub project page, and you immediately, after 4 lines of README, understand what the project is. Because today is full of companies, web pages, and GitHub projects that you, after 5 minutes, cannot understand what it's about. That's very,
Yes.
very strange. So everything must be easy. The communication super simple, and everything must be like that. Also, it is very important to have since the start in mind a potential user base. It is very important that what you do is useful for you, but it not must be something that is useful just for you. You have to identify something which is the intersection between something that you want and that you can see many others want. And from this
Yeah.
point of view, the software developer usually is oddly minded compared to the general population, even of other software developers, because there are people that are even more peculiar than others. And the risk is to transfer your very specific needs that nobody has to the other population. Instead, to identify something that the average, if it's in the system programming space, something that you can see everybody is going to need is very important. Another thing that, in my opinion, makes a big difference is to identify some project where good engineering can make the difference. So basically, if you put yourself, just an example for right now, inference systems are very important for AI, like Ollama, or there
Yeah.
are other competing inference systems. After all, even if there is a lot going inside, if you end doing something that uses llama.c++ as a backend, it's very hard to distinguish yourself from the other engines. So this is a space where if you don't have something to add, you are probably going to be one among the other. So it is very important to put yourself in a space where if you are good, you can show you are good, doing very good engineering. So this mix of things I
Yeah.
believe help to create, then there is a lot of luck, but the luck to catch you needs to be somewhat, you have to be in the right shape for the luck to.
Yeah, I agree. You have to create your own luck. And I guess in order to, about the last thing you said about finding a space where good engineering makes a difference, I guess you have to be like an expert in that kind of domain, a technical expert, to be able to recognize that there is a technical opportunity to make things better and possibly easier, as per your first point, right? So pick something that you know about, basically.
Yeah, I believe that too, but not to the point. You have to be near the problem space. But I
Yeah.
mean, if you want to do, for example, when I started to make Redis, I was more expert about programming languages and interpreters than
Then data
databases. But
structures.
because they share some similarity, you can fill the gap. Or another example. I almost finished my implementation for Redis of vector similarity.
Yeah.
While I am inside AI for a long time, I was not an expert of data structure about vector similarity, but I studied for like 1 month non-stop. I recovered the gap, and then I could apply all the good engineering that I had learned in other problems in
Yeah.
this specific problem. So, in my opinion, more than trying to be super vertical about a given problem space, it is important to be super strong about general problem
Yeah.
solving and design abilities.
Yeah. It's true. I think it's true. It's more and more true in general for software engineering moving forward, other than open source projects. So being good generalists is probably a skill that is gaining value, if you ask me.
Especially now with AI. AI
Yeah,
often
exactly.
is very good at filling very specific gaps that you have, like
Yeah.
opening a book, a mathematical book. I don't remember, for example, an approximation of a given function, and I go to the book to read about the polynomial that I need to use. Okay, right now AI is not as strong about the big picture, so to be generalists is becoming. Then I know it's a very fast moving space. Maybe in 1 year AI will be also a
Yeah.
good journalist. So let's
Who
say
knows?
in the start of 2025, that could be a plan.
Yes, yes, I agree. And then when it comes, let's say you have created a popular open source project that is used by a lot of people. When it comes to trying to either make a living or just make some money out of that, I mean, you have seen it all from working on open source software 100% by yourself to getting sponsored to working in a commercial company that supports the open source development. So, what do you think are the best models to make an open source project sustainable?
It depends on the scale you want to be. A very
Mm,
good plan could be to just don't create a very big company that may become an unicorn and do the IPO or something like that. But one can say, I want to create a company of 10 people to make just 10 millions every year, to
mhm.
sustain the company and have a good income. In this case, you can think about professional services and services, basically. Instead, if you want to create a very big company, you have to think about products. And this changes what you are going to do.
Yeah.
For example, if you want to make a small company, probably it makes sense to use a very permissive license like the BSD, as I did in the past. But now, if you want instead to create a business that becomes very big, it's better to pick a GPL license and create a situation where if your software becomes very widespread, you make cloud service providers paying for a license that is compatible with software as a service. That right now, the best thing to do is just release AGPL. I don't believe much on the open core approach where most of the value is closed, because if there is too much value closed, the users don't really have a compelling reason to use. For example, in this release that I'm going to make in 1 month from now, vector sets, even the advanced stuff, I believe will be all released inside the Redis, which is in GitHub, basically. But instead, if you want to create just a service company which can earn just a couple of millions every month, you can go perhaps with BSD and just be the core of the expertise. And so there are the different models depending on what you want to make.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So if I get this right, you're saying that you can start kind of small. That is, professional services is one of the lowest hanging fruits probably, but they scale harder than, I don't know, if you want to make a SaaS that makes 1 billion, but a SaaS is also harder to create and less proven and it's more likely to be unsuccessful than just providing services. And maybe you can start one way and then figure out what you can do.
Yeah, one thing which could be an interesting part is to start directly with the goal of not growing too much. Because if you do a service company and you do not grow too much, you are in a decent the situation. But if you do a service company that grows too much, then if there is a contraction of the business, you have to. It's a very fragile situation. So it's better to pick as soon as possible if you want to create as much. After all, often what happens is that you create a very big business. And then anyway, after the rounds of VCs and stuff like that, you own a very small slice. So an option is to do something big, smaller that you own completely.
Yeah, makes sense. So when I asked you what makes a project successful, the first thing that you replied with is simplicity. And I remember last month or so, you wrote a blog post called "We Are Destroying Software," so a positive outlook on the industry, where you criticize, among other things, a lot of this complexity, like build systems in chains of dependencies. And when I read it, it echoed also other things that I heard from other great open source creators. Like I interviewed last year David Heinemeier Hansson, who of course said that a lot of open source is too complicated, in part because it comes from big tech and tech stacks are bloated and many of these things. So do you think, especially web technology, but not only that, like infrastructure, front-end development, is too bloated and complicated today than it needs to be?
Yeah, it's terrible because big entities like Google cannot design good things. They did a very terrible job with HTTP, quick and new protocols. For small gains, there are huge complexity gains that make the web less accessible, less compatible. With Kubernetes, you use it if you really need to. Otherwise, people don't want to learn this thing. And with Angular, everything basically, Google is really a very good example of bad design culture in all basically all the kind of declinations. And I believe that
If I can stop you here, why do you think this happens? Because of course, Google, and I think it's the same with other companies, they're full of very brilliant people. So there has to be something about I don't know, the way decisions are made, or the things that happen when you get some scale, or the set of incentives. What do you think?
I believe that in the specific case of Google, the problem is exactly that it's full of brilliant people, but they are the PhD engineering type. And if you start from the point of view that software is an engineering problem, you end exactly doing quick. You measure and you say, I can go 5% faster if I glue together these two protocols. And then you make it, and you can actually see that it's 3%, 5% faster, and you say this is a success because the point of view is completely broken since the start. So you
Yeah,
really believe you are making progresses because you don't have basically good design taste and don't understand. Don't put value on simplicity and stuff. And in Google, the problem was that it was full of this kind of people at the same time, and likewise, they operate at a scale which is
yeah,
also very different than other people, and then they developed this kind of process. And another thing that was summed to this initial problem was that at some point somebody thought that in order to compensate all the open source that single individuals write for free, you can take a big project, company driven, made in this huge way, you drop it and you are like paying the open source community for what they did, which is not the case. You basically put online some complex thing that you are in some way imposing, making it a standard because you have the power to do that.
yeah,
So you are not doing anything good for basically us. But so one thing that is very important in my opinion to remark is that in general, if you want to pay software developers that do work on the open source, you have to pay such software developers and not to release some company open source software in order to compensate them, because their
yeah,
life is not going to improve not even 0.1% because of what you released.
yeah, yeah. So when sometimes we hear about giving back by these companies, it's not a real give back.
I think so, because the web especially is a very, very interesting case, because there is not even this engineering point of view of like some direction increment of performance or something like that. The web became a framework after framework, slower, more complicated, and it's the same web form, button, and listing
Yes,
list. So you
yes,
say 20 years ago was the same, it was much simpler stack, it was faster with slower computers. So what you accomplished is was but then if you really focus on what happened, you understand that the solution of that is written in the book The Mythical Man Month.
mm,
Simply, software developers at that point had split between backend and front end because of company needs. So at that point, since everything was split, the initial idea that was very sounding of the HTML5 semantic web, where you basically generate server-side HTML, very simple, and then with your CSS do the styling, and you just add the tiny bit of JavaScript for the dynamic
yeah,
part. That no longer works when you have two population separated population of developers. You have to make front end that makes just API calls to the backend, like if the two things don't talk, because they don't talk in the organization. Basically, they are different groups, and then you basically recreate everything that was already done in the software stack on the front end side. And then you have
yeah,
also the problem that now that we did this and the front end is much more complicated than in the past, what happens if my software developer goes in another company and I receive a new one? I have to standardize everything. So
mm,
basically, I have to create a framework so that everybody works in the same way. And this is how we get to this situation, basically.
yeah. And do you so I love that the original sin is like layering and splitting too much the skills between backend, front end, infra, and all this kind of stuff. But do you think this, especially when it comes to open source that comes from big companies, do you think this is an unescapable problem because big companies have big resonance and the power to make their own projects popular and successful, and they create projects for themselves, and so they're too complicated for the rest of us, and so we are stuck in this loop of excessive complexity, or there is a way out?
I think that many software developers realize that there are other ways to do things, but they don't want and can't because in the job market, the skill request is about this kind of technologies, and they don't want to go out of this set of technologies. So basically, it's not an understanding problem in my opinion. Sure, there are many people that just follow what the big fish will do, and but many others. But what I mean is that even if we create a trend, a new trend about doing web in a more simple way, many software developers cannot afford to do things in that way because they want to basically be hired. However, for
Yeah.
startups, it's different. The
Mm.
startup that does this kind of development will find to have an advantage compared to the other shops that instead use bloated technologies. So for startups, this is a very different. However, it's the only case where this technology smartness can be leveraged in some way. So I believe it will be very hard, but slow, maybe, step by step, it will form some consensus about the need. Also because, for example, I remember at Twitter, at some point, they realized that the infrastructure before Musk, this was before Musk when I regularly visited them every year or something like that in San Francisco. They realized that the backend was very fast, but the site was slow because of the slowness, all the latency accumulated in the front end side. So
Yeah.
basically, front end is creating problems for companies right now. So it is possible that slowly more and more companies will need to. Also, another thing that may make this change is if software will be more and more developed through AI to have
Yeah.
extremely complicated code bases to expose in the context of the LLM of the AI is not an advantage. In general,
Yeah.
simple code bases have advantages to be AI developed. So who knows? In the short run, I don't see any simplification coming, but maybe in the future.
Yeah, another thing that I'm noticing, speaking of AI, is that all this layering in engineering roles, like backend engineers, front-end engineers, it's partly reverting in favor of like more full stack engineers, product engineers, as they call it now, because it's kind of easier now. I mean, AI gives you this kind of universal basic proficiency at all the layers of the stack. So it's more beneficial to have engineers who can own things from top to bottom and just push a feature without the cost of coordination with all others. So this is something that I'm hopeful about, that we can compress this layering, and if we end up with full stack engineers again, then the set of incentives maybe changes in favor of simpler stacks. I don't know.
Absolutely. Also, AI has the advantage of making existing code bases more understandable for newcomers. So also
Yeah,
maybe companies will relax a bit about letting you do things in your way, because
yeah,
anyway, it's harder and harder to be in the situation like in the past, like the new camera arriving and saying, "Oh, what's this? It's out of the standard."
yeah. No, I agree. So I mean, things are happening very fast. So we'll see what happens. And I wanted to ask you more about AI because over the past few months, you started publishing more videos on your YouTube channel, which I enjoy a lot. So I encourage everyone to check out.
Thank
And you
you.
discuss,
Thanks.
yeah, yes. So check out Salvatore channel on YouTube, and you discuss many AI developments, about which anyway you have also written a novel, and we'll get there. But I wanted to ask you, how do you personally use AI for coding? Because I ask this to many people and everyone gives a different answer, from simply using cursor to using tools in the terminal to using AI just for rubber ducking. I have so many responses. So what's your take?
Okay, to start, I will say that my use of AI for coding is massive. Like it's not something that I do once in a while because I have a specific need. I every day hit Claude Sonnet multiple times while coding. Basically, the way I use AI changes a lot with the language and with what I'm doing. I use only the web interface of Claude. I don't use cursor. So, because I want to split the experience of when I'm writing code and when I'm writing code with AI. I want these two experiences to become completely separated, because when I am in the flow and I'm coding, I don't want nor
Okay.
other people, nor the LLM to touch anything that I'm doing.
Not
For
even the
example,
completions tab to
nothing,
complete nothing. Okay.
zero. I don't think that there is much value in completing things,
Yeah.
because the kind of coding that I do is very dense. There is no boilerplate in C code that I write. So, for example, C programming, vector sets, I wrote all the code myself. Then, when I have some doubt about potential things that I can do, I use pbcopy in the terminal to put the code in the
Text.
copy buffer, and I
Yeah.
paste it in the Claude, and I say, I have this problem here. I believe that the best solution in order to overcome this is that. What do you think about it? There are mathematical tricks that I don't know in order to make this faster, because I believe the optimal strategy is that one. So I use it like a colleague in front of the coffee machine, and I do this back and forth with Claude. When I'm writing system software, I can write C code with Claude, but not for Redis, not for system critical things, because otherwise I have to review every line of code, because it can make errors. Instead, what I do a lot is the contrary. I finish a function or a piece of code for Redis, I put it in the Claude and say, do a very precise code review, and especially focus in a list of areas where I believe there is the greater potential for bugs. After that, I rerun the prompt again and say, make an idea about all the things that could fail here, write a description of what are the more fragile pieces of code in this thing, and then do an analysis to see if that's true. So I restate the things in many ways, because sometimes a given prompt will catch things that other prompts are not able to catch. And this is the way I use for C coding. So code reviews and colleague, design colleague.
Yes. Pair programming with AI.
Exactly. Instead, for Python code, for example, for the tests of Redis vector sets, I just let the AI do whatever it wants from the point of view of writing the code, but I write in the prompt a very precise specification of what the test should do, the way it should be implemented, and then every time I write a new test in Python, I put in the context window 3 tests already written and checked myself, which are representative of how Claude already did it, but after very strict guidance. And I say, take this as a reference and write a new test that tests that and that. Another thing that I do, which I understand many developers don't do, is to put a lot of context inside the AI. For example, if I want the AI to write a test about vector sets, I don't put in the context window the documentation, but I put the source code of the module, because I want it to see everything that I have in mind about this kind of test. So sometimes I can say, this is the source code of the implementation, and you have to write a test for this high-level feature, thinking about how it is implemented, so that the integration test has the maximum probability of hitting potential sources of bugs. So that's the usage that I have for programming And then also for documentation, I tend to write documentation all by myself, but I at this point use it for templating. For example, after I wrote 50% of the documentation and the style is clear, if I have to document a new thing, I put all the readme inside the Claude and tell it write the documentation about that in the style of, and I put the C code as a reference. Then I edit
Yeah.
it as a template. After it makes errors about, for example, say doesn't stress what should be stressed, as redundant information that I want to remove.
Yeah.
So it is absolutely needed to edit the output, even in the documentation, to edit, because the documentation must be
Yes.
minimal, just
Yeah.
what matters and not what is obvious. And LLMs sometimes state what is obvious.
Yeah.
So many use cases are.
I think your use cases are very interesting because you write code, as you said, that is very dense and complex, technical wise. This is exactly one of those cases where many people say that AI doesn't help much. Like AI is better at, scaffolding or boilerplating or simple code, front end structures and stuff like that. So do you find that even for your use case, like you said you write vector sets in C, which is not exactly the simplest thing in the world, but you ask AI for improvements and it apparently helps. So does it help your productivity a lot with respect to when you didn't have it?
I believe I am more or less 5 times faster than I was before AI when writing system
Five
code in C.
times.
I can create in 2 months what normally could take like 1 year of work or 6 months at least. So the multiplicator is brutal because I can do things that otherwise I would never do because they would be too time consuming. For example, for vector sets, I did some optimizations that I didn't know very well how to do because of certain mathematical concepts that, for example, at some point I realized that initially I was using a very complex quantization technique, which was not like the one that I'm using now. And with this quantization technique, I still believe, I still thought that there was a way to still do the multiplication in the integer space and then adjust for the scaling of the quantization. I had this intuition. I understand mathematical at a decent level, but this specific thing was complicated. I didn't know how to compose something,
Yeah.
and Claude immediately did it. However, for this kind of help, you have to be very good at prompting. I don't believe everybody is the same at using LLMs. So sometimes people believe that if the AI doesn't work well enough, it's because AI is broken. But sometimes
Yeah.
you have to understand very well how to, when you write a prompt, you can insert a lot of design clues or stuff like that that then will basically move the generation in the right, among many local minimas, you can move it in the right direction to really help about that. I am 100% sure that AI can routinely find bugs before of users in complex C projects.
I love that you specify that some people don't use it correctly because that would have been my next question. That is because I also speak with people and there's brilliant engineers who tell me, nah, I mean, AI impact on my productivity is more like 10 to 20%, right? And there are also many like industry reports pointing at that kind of percentage of benefits. So I would have asked you, where's the gap? I mean, why is this difference between your usage and other people's usage, given that at this point, complexity of the code is not a factor, right? So it's probably, as you said, good prompting, which takes experience and being used to work with AI and figuring out how to use it correctly. I guess that's it.
That's possible. It's one factor, and I was, I believe, one of the very first to use AI continuously for software development. For example, the first blog post where I document my findings of programming with AI are from not this Christmas that passed, but the one before, I have a blog
Yeah.
post about that. And at this point, it was at least 6 months that I continuously used, basically from the first version of ChatGPT, and then I moved
Yeah.
to Claude. I always used the AI, and I saw myself changing a lot the way I started to use the AI after understanding what was the key in order to make it useful. Because initially I didn't get it very well. What was the way to use this system? And I believe another thing is that people underreport significantly the help that they get from AI because they don't want to lose their job. Also
There's this
because
bias. Yeah.
yeah, there is a bias. Also because of ego, and it's very
Yeah.
hard to say, that AI helps so much. But for me, it's really great. For example, all the time. I think that if I sum all the time it took me to write the test for vector
Yeah.
set, which is a very complicated test with many units. For example, one test that I have is that I wrote to Claude. I wanted a test that basically re-implements vector sets in a much simpler way in Python, doing ground truth, just checking
Mm.
vectors with cosine similarity, and you have to check if the recall is right, and then also
Yes.
re-implement in Python, not checking the implementation that I wrote, re-implement it in a simple and inefficient way, but a trivial way. So
Yeah.
I
So you
can
can
compare the,
compare.
and all this, maybe it was 1 hour of prompting in the course of 3 months, and I didn't write anything about this. And
Yeah.
this alone is, I think, believe, 1 month of work, because it's a
Yeah.
lot of Python code.
Especially, I think it matters even like psychologically for work that is usually burdensome or is more like toil, like writing tests, for example, or writing docs. I mean, the stuff that we know we have to do, but we don't exactly love, right? And if AI is able to take some of the effort away from doing that and leave you more to the creative parts, even not just on pure time basis, but even on your like well-being, your motivation, the way you spend your time. I think there is also that benefit which is not trivial and not everybody considers.
Absolutely. But also sometimes since you have this help, you jump doing things that otherwise would be like a bit over the top. For example,
Yeah,
with vector sets, I wrote the commands which are all threaded, which is not how Redis works. Normally Redis is single threaded. This module is works completely threaded, even if it talks with a single threaded core, because it was very important for vector sets, because vector similarity is slow. It's not
yeah,
like the other data structures that Redis has. So the same design decision that made me to employ single core was no longer valid with vector sets. So I changed my mind for this module. And because I found a solution that I thought it was working, and I wrote tests and chatted a lot with Claude Sonnet about this, and about the potential correctness of that, to the point that I said, okay, this is totally safe. I can do it. Otherwise, maybe before this
yeah,
co-design stage, and also I was able to validate a lot of assumptions with it writing a lot of code. So a
yeah,
lot of code that I have had to write in order to validate that certain, before implementing, all the things, I wanted to validate certain safety things. And
yeah,
the way I did this was very complicated, because I took the module source code already. I needed to be sure that certain things were holding, and then so it's unbelievable. I really
yeah.
don't want to go back to non-AI coding world.
I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. But I love how much you talk about testing. And I've heard, for example, by somebody else that with AI, some teams, I mean, it's like test-driven development is having a silent renaissance, because you can, with AI, a good workflow is to write good specs and maybe a testing plan, and which AI can follow, and that keeps in control of things, and eventually leads to better software. So do you start writing software now with AI, with testing already in your minds, already we start with tests, or maybe you did that even before AI?
No, I am supporter of the other way, the contrary way to do things, of always writing test after. And the reason is
Okay.
that after I write the implementation, I believe I have a better understanding of the failure modes of the implementation. So after
Okay.
I wrote the implementation, I can write tests which stress the fragile parts.
Yeah. Makes sense. Makes totally sense. So I wanted to ask you also about another thing about AI, because you published a novel, a science fiction novel, anticipating a lot of things that happened with AI, like prompt engineering and more. And the novel is called WOP. You published it in 2022. So I'm promoting everything you did, from Redis to the YouTube channel to WOP, because I think it's all awesome.
Thanks.
And so you wrote this way before AI was cool, before ChatGPT came out. I think when was it that you started working on WOP? Like 2020 or something?
Yeah, 2021, I believe, or 2020.
Okay.
I remember that I saw a GPT-2 demo.
Yeah.
GPT-2 was basically it's the same of GPT-3 from the point of view of the architecture,
Yeah.
but it was too small, and there was
Yeah.
none of the emergent capabilities. But still was quite impressed. And then I had early access to the GPT-3 demo, the one that could
Yeah.
just complete text.
Yes.
And I said, okay, this is
This is it.
going to change everything. I was already
Yes.
shocked in general about the neural networks because in 2003 and 2004, I wrote a neural network implementation, and I did a lot of experiments like with image compression, where my neural network in my computer could find certain techniques that are used in JPEG and stuff like that. And I was sure since then that it was just a matter of scale because it was too much powerful. But then when I saw GPT-3, I saw that the world like we know it is going to change very soon. And when I was writing WOP, I thought this book is too late at this point. It's too late because in a couple of years it will be everything reality, and
Yeah.
it was the case basically. But in some way I wanted to write. The first problem that I had is that I wanted to write, because in general
Yeah.
for me coding is a style exercise, and I wanted to try this style exercise in other domains, so writing.
Yeah.
But also it was very compelling for me to because when I was telling everybody about GPT-2, GPT-3, people were like, nobody
Yeah.
was really interested in it. And I
It's true.
thought I want to write about this thing in a novel.
Love this. And I wanted to ask, I'm a newsletter writer, so also the thought of writing a novel has crossed my mind many times. So I have this more selfish question, that is, how was the experience of writing a novel compared to programming or doing maybe a big software project?
It's very similar. So if you already are a coder, in my opinion, you are prepared to the artwork and the complexity of the novel, because it's full of many small things that are all connected. And since you already know that of other domains, you are prepared, because some people remain shocked. They say, "Oh my
Mm.
God, why I did this?" Because they never experienced complexity at scale, and it's
Yeah.
very really complicated. It's a lot of work. But in my opinion, if you want to do that, do it, because even if you know, for example, WOP sold I don't know 4,000 copies. It's tiny. Even if it's more than the average science fiction book in Italy, it's
It's
like
way, way more.
10 ways more. But it's tiny, the number of readers. But for once, I believe that each of these readers are very important for me.
Yes.
Every single people, because it creates an asynchronous connection between you that were writing and the people that are reading. It's a composition of minds. So for me, it's
Yes.
very, very important. Also because Wattpad was lucky of finding a target community, which is basically Italian IT. And because of that, what happened is that because usually what's bad about books that are not well known is that one reader is here, one other reader, and nobody talks about the book. Instead, the book circulated in a community, so it was possible like to make it up. But also for yourself, it will be a really incredible experience. So I suggest doing that because it changed completely the way you read. After that, you read books.
This is so interesting. This is interesting because many of the things that you said, I kind of experienced them at a small scale with the newsletter, especially when you said it creates a connection with your readers. And it's like, you know what they say, that writing is like networking for introverts, because it allows other people to reach out to you because they're like-minded as opposed to you reaching out to them. And I definitely see that with the newsletter, and I would love to do something at scale like that. But I will let you know.
Thanks. I will read your book for sure.
Thank you. You're too kind. So thank you so much, Salvatore. It was a fantastic chat, and so thank you so much for being with us on the show.
Thank you, Luca. It was very nice to talk with you and to meet you in person. I hope we will take some coffee sooner or later.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this chat valuable, you can subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the show. You can find all past episodes and learn more about the show at refactoring.fm. See you in the next episode.